Casket burial and cremation, not your only options. When we think about planning our funerals, most of us think of one of two options that are available to us. One, what we would refer to as casket burial. That is the process where you will normally be embalmed. You will be placed into a casket. That casket will then be placed into a vault that is in the ground at the cemetery. That is the traditional concept of casket burials. Obviously, there are costs associated, and this has nothing to do with the cost of the service itself or the church service or any of those things. Simply that process has obviously cost involved with it. There's a cost of having you embalmed. There's a cost of buying the metal casket. There's a cost of buying the cement vault. There's a cost of having all those placed into the cemetery. Many clients out there in more recent years are interested, though, in cremation. Why? Well, one reason, in many cases, cremation is much less expensive. My mother, who died several years ago now, was in Florida. She lived in Michigan, but she died while she was in Florida, and she was cremated while she was in Florida, and then her remains were simply sent back to Michigan, obviously at much less expense than what would traditionally be involved in having to have her embalmed in Florida and put into a casket and flown up here or however else she would have been transported here. So many folks are looking at cremation as an alternative, one, because of the cost. Two, in many places, we're quite frankly running out of room for people to be buried. Big cities, go to New York, go to any big city and look at cemeteries in those places, and we're running out of space. So many people are choosing for cremation. Now, in many times in cremation, you might still be embalmed. In the state of Michigan, that's really going to be dependent upon whether or not your body's going to be shown as part of the funeral process. But certainly you've got the cost of the cremation itself, normally a cost of an urn. And again, if you're going to be buried, if after the cremation process your remains are going to be buried, most of the cemeteries, again, require some sort of a vault to be placed in the ground that the urn will be placed in. Two options, casket, burial, and cremation. And many people thought, well, those are the only options that I have. Well, today, more and more folks are starting to say, are there other options that perhaps in some cases might even be less expensive? Some people are looking, saying, are there options that perhaps might be more environmentally friendly, if you will, than those traditional options? Obviously, with a casket burial, when your body is placed in the ground, any drugs, if you have inside your body, perhaps you've been on chemotherapy for cancer treatment or whatever's going on, will ultimately seep into the ground. Some people are concerned about that. Some folks are concerned about what happens to that embalming fluid eventually seeping into the ground. Some people are going to be concerned about the questions about traditional cremation and what sort of things are released into the atmosphere in that entire process, etc. So many folks are looking at what they consider more environmentally friendly options. And one of those options that is available, depending upon where you happen to be in the state of Michigan, is what's called a green burial or a natural burial. So what is it? Well, essentially, it will be, think of it as a traditional type casket burial without the casket. So there won't be a casket. There won't be a vault that the casket is placed inside. There will not be any embalming of your body before it is buried. You will be buried in either some sort of what might be a biodegradable casket or perhaps just a funeral shroud will be used in burying your body. And then you would be placed in the ground. Again, without a casket, without a vault, you will be placed into the ground. And in many of the cemeteries, rather than maintaining the site with nicely cut lawn, they will plant native plants and grasses for a more environmentally friendly landscape and groundskeeping. You don't have to mow it. You don't have to water it, fertilize it, whatever it is that the cemetery has to otherwise do. So if that's something that might be of interest to you, what you need to understand is that is going to be dependent on the cemetery and whether or not the cemetery is going to offer green burial or natural burial services, because obviously there is a difference now in the maintenance of that particular cemetery. There's an organization out there, funeralinformationsociety.org, that has a list of cemeteries in Michigan. You can also send me an email, tom@tuesdaywithtom.com. I'll be happy to send you a link to another site that has a link to a number of cemeteries that are located in the state of Michigan. But currently there's only a handful. There's one in Milan, there's one in Waterford, there's one in Roseville, Wyandotte, Granville, Traverse City, and Houghton. Those are the only ones that I'm aware of. And it looks like soon there might be one in Dexter and Chelsea. So that's not a lot of cemeteries to be choosing from, but certainly, as with any other sort of movement, the more that people start saying, hey, we are interested in a natural or a green burial, it is likely that more and more cemeteries will make the decision to offer those services. Again, cost is less expensive because you're not going to have embalming, you're not going to have a casket, you're not going to have a vault in the ground. Another option that might be available in some states but currently is not available in Michigan. Now, whether it becomes available in Michigan will certainly depend upon perhaps enough people. If they become interested, they start talking to their legislators, and perhaps Michigan will introduce and ultimately pass legislation, as a handful of other states have done, which provides for what they call a green cremation. If you look at a traditional cremation that involves fire, a green cremation involves not fire, but using a chemical process that normally consists of water and some other chemicals that reduces your body, similar to what happens in a cremation, but without the heat. Again, not available currently in Michigan. So if that's something that you might be interested in, you're not going to be able to do that in Michigan. Maybe if you're going to move to another state, that might be available for you. Again, if you'd like to send me a link or send me an email, tom@tuesdaywithtom.com, I can certainly send you a link to some information on the internet. Of course, you can certainly go to the internet and look up biocremation or green cremation, different names for a similar process. And most recently, Washington State has now become the first state to legalize composting as an alternative to casket burial or cremation. If you think about it, okay, composting, while people might balk at that idea, is an ancient method that was used before modern times when we started going down the process of having caskets and burials with vaults, etc., etc. So it is an ancient method that is finding some renewed interest in today. And the state of Washington has been the first to legalize that concept. There's a company, it's called Recompose, RECOMPOSE. If you want information about that company, it's recompose.com. They provide information, and they are the authorized company in Washington that is going to begin offering that service that they call recomposition. But basically, it's converting the human body over a period of time into soil. And the soil can be used in a garden. The family can take the soil home. And this is not simply putting people out in the backyard and covering them up with leaves or grass or anything like that. If you look at their process, essentially what it involves is they have a system of reusable hexagonal vessels that are inside this, according to their information on their website, an atrium-like space where families can come and visit, similar to going to a mausoleum, I guess, in its own way, that over time the remains will be converted through a natural composting process into soil that the family then could do what they want to do with it, similar to what people do today with their loved ones who have been cremated. Again, state of Washington is the first to legalize it. Obviously, as this becomes more mature in the process, it is likely that other states will begin looking at offering that or recognizing that. I know Recompose, if you look at their literature, has plans to be expanding as other states adopt and legalize that process. So, if that's something that's of interest to you, recognizing Washington is the only place that can be done, but if it's something of interest to you, and if enough people, again, contact the legislators and insist that we now get offered to our Michigan residents some other alternatives that perhaps are more environmentally friendly, perhaps some have even some cost savings, although Recompose, from their initial numbers, it looks like it is likely to be more expensive than traditional cremation. So it's not going to be a cost savings over traditional cremation. What would be less expensive, though, than a casket burial. Again, if you want any information about green burial in Michigan or natural burial, or information about green cremation, or even information about this Recompose, send me an email. You're welcome to do that, Tom, at tuesdaywithtom.com. And I will be happy to send you a link to different articles that are now talking about these various options so that casket burial and cremation will not be your only options. Tuesday with Tom has been brought to you by the estate planning attorneys at Doyle Law PC. To learn how we can help you with your estate plan or with settling a loved one's estate, please call us today at 517-323-7366. That's 517-323-7366.